Title: They Knew. The 3,000-meter nightmare they sold for $20 billion, inside China's most expensive concrete fraud. Visual: high intensity, fast-paced B-roll of ultra-luxury glass towers in Shanghai and Shenzhen, cutting sharply to a stylized, high-contrast structural schematic of a pencil-thin skyscraper. Deep dramatic bass drop, bold neon red text flashes on screen. The construction files file no. 9. Text transitions to a stark black screen with white lettering. Shanghai, April 2025. Narrator: urgent, data-heavy. Television news cadence. Somewhere between the first draft and the final stamped version of the official state-mandated property sales disclosure used to sell luxury penthouses at the Jinmao Bund Vista Tower in Shanghai. A single phrase quietly mutated. The early language approved by the legal department explicitly stated the super-tall tower's exposed architectural concrete facade will permanently prevent moisture and water penetration. The later version, slipped into the final buyer's packets, changed that guarantee entirely. The new text read, the facade was designed to prevent water penetration. Will prevent became designed to prevent. 3 characters in Mandarin, swapped out for one definitive promise. According to a massive 46-page civil fraud lawsuit filed in the Shanghai Higher People's Court in April 2025, that tiny edit was not a typographical error. It was not routine legal housekeeping. The residential committee of the tower alleges that this was the exact moment the consortium selling the most expensive residential mega structure in the Eastern Hemisphere stopped promising. The building would actually keep the East China Sea weather out, because their internal engineering logs proved they already knew it wouldn't. Welcome to the construction files. And this is document number 9. Today's file is a radical departure from our previous investigations. On this channel, we have already shown you the structural failures of high-rises from Chongqing to Shenzhen. We covered the visible cracks at Jinmao Bund Vista. We covered the internal elevator cable snaps, the structural swaying that caused high-floor swimming pools to overflow, and the multi-floor plumbing ruptures. Today, we are not asking if this luxury monolith is failing. Today, we are asking a far colder, far more calculating question, the exact question wealthy buyers are now forcing executives to answer under oath. Who knew? When did they know it? And what did they do with that critical engineering data while 20 billion, 2.9 billion USD in premium real estate was being pushed out the door to China's elite? Visual, fast zoom in on corporate logos, court stamps, and drone footage of a 425-meter white concrete grid tower towering over the Shanghai skyline. Data overlays show 20 million and thousand sales, 1,396 feet tall, 96 stories. Here is what the official judicial record shows. In late April 2025, the Jinmao Bund Vista Residential Committee launched a historic, multi-front lawsuit against master developers Chairman Zhang Feng and the Huaxia CIM Development Group, alongside the project's local design institute, Huandong Architecture and Engineering, and the primary state-backed construction management firm, Yance McGraw-Hudson. The complaint doesn't just ask for a staggering 1.2 billion to 165 million USD in direct structural rectification costs. It demands massive punitive damages on top. And you need to understand the legal mechanics here. The core allegation isn't just that the tower has physical defects. That civil battle began years ago in 2021. This new 2025 filing alleges deliberate, organized, and far-reaching corporate fraud. The residential committee claims that between 2011 and 2015, during the critical slip-forming and concrete curing phases, the developers discovered widespread, systemic structural cracking throughout the building's load-bearing concrete exterior. And instead of halting the project to remediate the core, they allegedly concealed it. They concealed it from ultra-high net worth buyers, and according to the legal text, they deliberately falsified records handed to the Shanghai Municipal Commission of Housing and Urban Rural Development. Let's put a hard, unyielding number on the word widespread, because this channel runs on data, not hyperbole. According to an independent laser topography facade survey embedded deep within the court exhibits, inspectors identified exactly 1,893 distinct structural and material defects cutting across the external concrete matrix. 1-893, that specific data point is the smoking gun. The lawsuit alleges that when a formal compliance letter was sent to the municipal building inspectors to secure the tower's final occupancy permit, that letter deliberately misrepresented the depth, severity, and structural type of the concrete microcracking, completely omitting the survey's true findings. In plain, unvarnished language, the local housing bureau was handed a sanitized, completely fabricated picture of structural integrity, while the real terrifying defect count sat locked in a corporate server. Visual. Dramatic pause. Screen flashes a standard legal disclaimer graphic over a slow panning shot of the tower's gleaming, razor-thin silhouette against the clouds. Now, before we press further into this paper trail, we must state the standard legal baseline. And on this specific file, it matters more than ever. Everything we are describing is an active allegation in a major court proceeding. The defendants, Huaxia Sim and Chairman Zhang, have not been found legally liable for fraud by a court of law. In previous corporate statements, the development consortium vigorously defended Jinmao Bund Vista, calling it the premier architectural jewel of the modern Shanghai coast, claiming the radical structure has performed remarkably well under extreme typhoon conditions. The defendants will have their day in court. That initial 2021 defect case has already generated over 4 million pages of technical discovery, which tells you exactly how high the stakes are and how hard both sides are fighting. What we are doing today is analyzing the paper trail filed by the residents, because in mega engineering disasters, the paper trail is where the truth hides. To understand how an ultra-luxury tower gets aggressively sold to the public, while a massive structural defect list grows in the dark, you have to rewind to the early 2010s. Shanghai's elite waterfront residential market didn't truly exist yet on this scale. Chairman Zhang Feng, one of the most aggressive and politically connected real estate tycoons in eastern China, successfully assembled a highly coveted plot of land right off the primary corporate axis of the city. The design commissioned from an international avant-garde architect was radical in its structural simplicity. A pure, unblemished white concrete grid rising 96 stories, 425 meters into the sky, and so unbelievably slender it defied traditional engineering conventions. The tower's aspect ratio, its height-to-width proportion, is an unprecedented 15:1. To put that into perspective, a standard wooden pencil sitting on your desk has an aspect ratio of roughly 30:1. This 96-story residential monolith is, from an engineering standpoint, exactly half a pencil standing on its tip, exposed to the brutal, high-velocity wind loads shifting off the East China Sea. And that brings us to the single, fateful engineering decision from which every single disaster in this file flows. Visual. High-tech 3D structural render of the Jinmao Bund Vista Tower. The animation highlights the outer white concrete grid glowing red, showing how structural loads transfer downward. Text overlay, the load-bearing skin. Ex post architectural concrete. Narrator, metric driften. Analytical, aggressive energy. On the Jinmao Bund Vista Tower, that striking white concrete grid you see cutting through the Shanghai skyline is not a decorative facade. It is not a cosmetic curtain wall wrapped around an internal steel core. It is the structure itself. The facade is the skeleton. In a radical departure from traditional super-tall design, the engineers eliminated the external glass and steel curtain wall completely. Instead, they specified high-strength, white architectural concrete poured directly on site. This exposed concrete grid is designed to carry the building's massive vertical loads, while simultaneously acting as its outer skin against the elements. That means every single micro crack in that concrete matrix is not a cosmetic blemish that can be painted over. It is a structural fracture in a load-bearing element. It is a direct breach in the only line of defense standing between a 300 million luxury penthouse and a high-velocity rainstorm a quarter-mile above the streets of Shanghai. The physics of this engineering choice are brutal and unforgiving. When water penetrates cracked concrete, it travels deep into the core until it reaches the internal high-tensile steel reinforcement bars. Steel that gets wet undergoes rapid oxidation. It corrodes. As steel corrodes, it expands up to 6 times its original volume. That internal expansion exerts immense pressure on the surrounding concrete from the inside out, causing a catastrophic cycle known as spalling. The concrete cracks further, letting in more water, accelerating the oxidation. Engineers have a technical phrase for where that structural cycle ends, and it is a phrase you never want associated with an ultra-luxury residential tower: structural delamination, according to the 46-page fraud complaint filed in April 2025. The internal engineering warnings started almost immediately during the primary construction phase. The lawsuit alleges that between 2012 and 2014, as the slip-form casting systems were climbing past the 40th floor, the project's own site engineers and quality control inspectors from the China Academy of Building Research raised urgent alarms. The concrete mix, highly specialized white port cement blended with slag and custom aggregates to achieve that iconic marble-like finish, was curing too quickly in Shanghai's intense summer humidity. Thermal stress was causing deep shrinkage cracks. The logs show that inspectors noted hairline fractures spreading across the perimeter beams of the upper mechanical floors. Yet, according to the legal text, the Huaxia CIM Development Group pushed the construction crews forward anyway, demanding a rapid 4-day per floor build cycle to avoid massive capital interest delays and maximize their upfront pre-sales profits. Visual close-up on dynamic text callouts from the lawsuit. A digital timeline scales from 2011 to 2015. On-screen graphics show engineering stamps and blueprints of the facade defects. The tower officially topped out in late 2014 and opened its doors in 2015. And buried deep within the technical exhibits of the 2025 lawsuit is a specific engineering detail that reads like a sensational corporate thriller. When the structural crisis of the cracking concrete became too undeniable to ignore in executive board rooms, the engineering consultants recommended a comprehensive, long-term remediation strategy, wrapping the exposed concrete elements in a high-grade, heavy-duty elastomeric coating. This is a highly flexible, weather-resistant polymer membrane engineered to stretch across hairline cracks, sealing out moisture while allowing the concrete structure to breathe during high wind deflections. But according to the sworn testimony in the complaint, Chairman Zhang Feng rejected the elastomeric coating because it would slightly dull the glossy, high-prestige white finish of the tower's exterior. Instead, the lawsuit alleges that Zhang suggested finishing the entire 425-meter concrete facade with an unrated, clear silicone hydrophobic sealer, a chemical product practically identical to the specialized hull glaze used on his personal luxury yacht, harbored at the Shanghai marina. Let that sink in. A yacht finish. The residential committee's legal team placed that exact detail in the court filing for a devastating strategic reason. A yacht glaze is entirely about cosmetic vanity and immediate optical brilliance. An elastomeric coating is about structural survival and decades of moisture protection. The core argument of the 2025 fraud case is that given a direct binary choice between structural durability and immediate aesthetic marketability, the developers consciously chose how the building looked over how long it would safely last. While this alleged cover-up was playing out behind closed corporate doors out on the street, Jinmao Bund Vista was executing the most aggressively successful luxury real estate marketing campaign in Chinese history. Based on the certified closing documents submitted to the local real estate bureau, the development reaped an astronomical 20 billion yen, $2.9 billion USD, from the sale of just 142 ultra-luxury residential units and its exclusive lower-level commercial spaces. The buyer list read like an exclusive roster of the nation's elite, tech founders from Shenzhen, billionaire shipping magnates, real estate tycoons, and high-profile entertainment celebrities. The 90th floor duplex penthouse alone was marketed globally as a trophy property without equal, and every single one of those buyers transferred their multi-million yuan deposits based entirely on the state-stamped property sales disclosure document, the exact document where that critical 3-character change was quietly made. Will permanently prevent water penetration was stripped away. Designed to prevent water penetration was inserted. The 2025 complaint alleges that this offering plan was modified multiple times in absolute secrecy, shifting the legal liability for future structural moisture damage directly away from the development consortium and onto the unsuspecting buyers. If you have ever signed a property contract where a single vital clause was edited in the final draft and nobody explicitly pointed it out to you at the closing table, you know exactly what these buyers believe happened to them. Except their version came with a 9-figure price tag and a building that was structurally unzipping itself 400 meters in the air. Visual, panoramic, sweeping drone shots of mega skyscrapers draped in heavy sea fog across mainland China's primary economic zones. Pudong in Shanghai, Luohu in Shenzhen, and the massive high-density super-tall clusters of Tianjin and Guangzhou visually map the geographic similarities between these coastal corridors and the subject property. Narrator, commanding, high-alert, journalistic tone. To fully comprehend the systemic risk exposed by the Jinmao Bund Vista file, you cannot look at this tower in isolation. You have to look at the broader, hyper-accelerated architectural landscape of modern mainland China. Over the last 2 decades, the coastal megacities of the Yangtze River Delta and the Greater Bay Area became a vast, unprecedented testing ground for super-tall structural engineering. We pushed buildings higher, faster, and thinner than any civilization in human history. But concrete, physics, and geology do not care about developer timelines. When you look across the domestic record of high-rise construction, the engineering parallels to the Jinmao Bund Vista crisis are immediate and deeply alarming. Consider what happened in the coastal tech hub of Shenzhen in May 2021. When a prominent 70-story skyscraper began to violently wobble and vibrate on a perfectly clear day, forcing thousands of occupants into a panicked street evacuation. The subsequent investigation by the local construction bureau and national structural academics pointed directly to a combination of heavy offshore wind currents, internal temperature differentials, and structural resonance. Super-tall towers are not static, unyielding blocks of rock. They are dynamic vertical cantilevers designed to flex and dissipate energy. But when a building is built with an extreme 15:1 aspect ratio like Jinmao Bund Vista, that movement becomes extreme. If the outer concrete skeleton is already compromised by nearly 2,000 structural microfractures, every single millimeter's wide sway caused by typhoons rolling off the East China Sea isn't just an inconvenience. It is actively fatiguing the structural matrix of the tower. Visual, side-by-side graphic comparison chart mapping the dimensions, aspect ratios, and material compositions of the Shanghai Tower, Shenzhen's Ping and Finance Center, and the Jinmao Bund Vista Tower. Red warning indicators flash over the concrete structural metrics of Jinmao Bund Vista. Super tall, structure total height structural aspect, ratio primary exterior material identified, engineering vulnerability Shanghai, tower 632 meters, 7:1 double layer. Glass curtain wall soft alluvial soil settlement mitigated by deep pile engineering, Ping Center, Shenzhen, 599 meters, 10:1 stainless steel and glass curtain high wind load resistance via massive outrigger trusses. Jinmao Bund Vista, subject 425 meters, 15:1, extreme exposed architectural concrete skeleton 1,893 documented facade fractures allowing saltwater moisture infiltration. Look at the data on your screen. The standard, globally accepted aspect ratio for an ultra-tall skyscraper rarely exceeds 8:1 or 10:1. The iconic Shanghai Tower achieves its stability through a wide, tapered base and a highly flexible, non-load-bearing double-glass curtain wall wrapped around a massive internal concrete core. The Ping and Finance Center in Shenzhen utilizes high-strength stainless steel outriggers to lock the tower into the bedrock. Jinmao Bund Vista stands alone as a terrifying structural anomaly. An extreme 15:1 pencil tower where the exterior concrete skin is forced to do all the heavy lifting. There is no protective glass curtain shield. There is no external steel armor. This architectural strategy mirrors some of the most complex engineering challenges seen in the high-density districts of Guangzhou and the reclaimed land zones of Tianjin. In those regions, municipal engineers have long warned about the devastating impact of coastal microclimates on high-strength concrete. Coastal China experiences intense humidity, extreme seasonal temperature shifts, and heavy, salt-laden sea air. When you cast an experimental, high-density white concrete mix without an external protective barrier in this specific environment, you are fighting a war against chemistry. The salt in the air acts as a chemical catalyst, accelerating chloride ion penetration through the micro cracks directly toward the structural reinforcement steel. National design codes, managed by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development, explicitly state that structural concrete exposed to coastal marine environments must have a highly regulated, dense composition with strict crack width limits to prevent this exact degradation. The 2025 Jinmao Bund Vista lawsuit alleges that the developers completely bypassed these national safety thresholds to deliver a specific, glossy aesthetic that would command record-breaking square meter prices from China's ultra-wealthy elite. This is why the elite engineering community across China is watching this specific Shanghai courtroom with absolute intensity. If the Jinmao Bund Vista Tower's exposed concrete skeleton is found to be fundamentally unsuited for the brutal atmospheric realities of the eastern coastline, it exposes a massive liability loophole in how ultra-luxury mega-projects are approved, constructed, and marketed across every major Tier 1 city in the country. The structural integrity of a 425-meter tower cannot be sustained by corporate public relations or arbitrary yacht glaze treatments. The physics are absolute. Once moisture compromises the interior rebar grid of a load-bearing exterior skeleton, the countdown begins. And as the residents of this multi-billion yuan vertical enclave are discovering, no amount of wealth can insulate you from the cold laws of material science. Visual, high-contrast, moody drone footage of the upper residential floors of the Jinmao Bund Vista Tower, shrouded in dark rain clouds. Transition to leaked smartphone video clips, high-end marble corridors flooded with cascading water, high-speed elevator buttons short-circuiting with sparks, and the deep, hollow, terrifying groaning sound of concrete structural deflection under heavy wind loads. Narrator, deeply empathetic, yet urgent and dramatic voice. Then, the multi-billion yuan tower filled up with its prestigious residents. And that is exactly when this architectural monolith began to loudly talk back to its owners. To fully grasp the human scale of this engineering nightmare, you have to look past the corporate spreadsheets and step inside the actual apartments. We are talking about residential units that cost upwards of 150,000 to 250,000 per square meter, where China's top industrial captains and tech entrepreneurs expected absolute architectural perfection. Instead, they bought a front-row seat to structural degradation. Let's look at the sworn testimony of Mr. Li Jin, a prominent venture capitalist who purchased a full-floor high-zone apartment on the 82nd floor for an astronomical 180 million, 26 million USD. According to his deposition embedded in the 2025 fraud filing, the nightmare didn't start with subtle aesthetic flaws. It started with a violent plumbing and structural failure during a standard autumn typhoon in late 2019. As high-velocity winds buffeted the slender tower, causing it to flex within its calculated structural limits. The extreme mechanical strain caused the building's main high-pressure blackwater and freshwater risers to shear completely off their brackets on the 85th floor. Within minutes, millions of liters of water cascaded downward through the internal electrical chases and luxury elevator shafts. Mr. Li described standing in his living room, watching water explode out of his custom-recessed ceiling lights like a waterfall, destroying millions of yuan worth of rare art and imported hardwood paneling. But it wasn't the water damage that terrified him the most. It was the sound. Li testified under oath that during high-wind events, the creaking, popping, and deep structural banging noises echoing through the exposed concrete grid were so deafeningly intense that his family described it as utterly intolerable. They were forced to wear industrial noise-canceling headphones inside their own home just to sleep. The building was flexing so dynamically that the ultra-luxury trash chute system, running vertically through the core, warped out of alignment. Every time a resident on a higher floor dropped a trash bag, it would strike the bent interior lining of the chute, creating a sound that multiple residents described in court papers as a sonic boom or an artillery shell exploding inside the walls. Visual, dramatic, slow-motion graphic reconstruction of a high-speed elevator car jammed inside a warped shaft. Red flashing alert warnings illustrate how structural swaying bends the steel guide rails, triggering automatic emergency brake locks. And then there are the elevators. The single most terrifying point of failure for anyone living a quarter-mile in the sky. In a 96-story residential tower, the elevator is not a luxury convenience. It is your literal lifeline. It is the only practical way to return home from the 90th floor. According to emergency maintenance logs subpoenaed from the Yangtze McGraw-Hudson construction management firm, the tower experienced over 73 documented elevator entrapment events between 2018 and 2024. The mechanics behind these failures are completely devastating. When heavy winds hit a tower with an extreme 15:1 aspect ratio, the structure sways. As the concrete skeleton flexes, the high tensile steel guide rails inside the central elevator shafts are forced to bend along with it. The building's high-speed smart elevators, engineered to travel at speeds exceeding 8 meters per second, possess highly sensitive laser alignment sensors. The moment the sensor detects that the structural guide rails have drifted even a few millimeters out of vertical alignment, the emergency computer system instantly triggers the mechanical brakes to prevent a catastrophic high-speed derailment. Imagine being a resident like Ms. Chen Wei, a high-profile corporate attorney who occupied a luxury suite on the 76th floor. In her sworn affidavit, Ms. Chen recounts an incident where she and her elderly mother were trapped inside a pitch-black elevator car for nearly 5 hours, suspended 300 meters in the air. Listening to the high-wind cables violently whipping against the interior walls of the shaft while the tower visibly swung around them, the fire rescue services had to manually rappel down the shaft to extract them through an emergency roof hatch. For the ultra-wealthy residents of Jinmao Bund Vista, the realization was setting in. They had trapped their fortunes and their lives inside a flawed structural experiment. In September 2021, the building's newly elected residential committee finally reached its breaking point and launched their initial, historic, civil defect lawsuit. Armed with a comprehensive engineering audit conducted by independent consultants from the China Academy of Building Research, the committee cited over 1,500 distinct construction, mechanical, and design defects, openly classifying dozens of them as acute life safety hazards. That initial suit demanded a staggering 1.7 billion yen, 250 million USD, in immediate remediation funds. The legal text of that 2021 complaint included a searing, unyielding indictment that should be framed and hung in the executive office of every single property developer in Shanghai. The filing formally labeled the Jinmao Bund Vista project as one of the most egregious examples of systemic developer malfeasance, material corner-cutting, and structural negligence in the entire history of high-rise residential construction in modern China. For nearly 4 years, that 2021 defect case has been grinding through the municipal court system, generating an absolute mountain of over 4 million pages of technical discovery, material testing records, and conflicting engineering expert testimonies. So, why does the brand new filing from April 2025 change absolutely everything? Why has it sent shockwaves through the entire luxury real estate sector? Because the entire legal theory has radically shifted. A standard construction defect case is a battle over engineering execution. It simply says, you built this structure incorrectly, now you must pay to fix it. But a civil fraud case is an entirely different universe. A fraud case says, you knew this structure was fundamentally failing while it was still being poured. You deliberately hid the damage from the state inspectors, and you maliciously sold it to us anyway. Fraud is the exact legal mechanism that unlocks massive, uncapped punitive damages, the kind of financial penalties Chinese courts award not to simply compensate the victims, but to aggressively punish corporate misconduct and deter future bad behavior across the entire industry. And fraud is precisely why the residential committee's lawyers spent 46 pages of meticulous, timeline-driven engineering archaeology reconstructing the paper trail. They have mapped out exactly which corporate executives signed off on the falsified facade surveys, which engineers' warnings were buried in internal emails, and exactly who authorized that silent, three-character alteration in the buyer property disclosures. They are no longer just arguing about curing concrete or water infiltration. They are arguing about conscious corporate deception. Visual, high-contrast corporate financial graphics overlaying a bleak rain-swept Shanghai skyline. A neon red line graph plummets downward. Text overlay, the financial sloop. Valuation collapse. Narrator, informative, cutting, cold reality energy. Now, let's talk about what this structural fraud allegation does to the money, because this is the exact point where every luxury property owner in Shanghai, and frankly, every high-end real estate investor across mainland China, needs to pay absolute attention. Let's look at the hard resale market data. Because the Jinmao Bund Vista Tower has just given us the cleanest, most devastating data set in the history of elite real estate. The building's signature 90th floor duplex penthouse was originally listed with an aggressive record-breaking price tag of 1.2 billion yen, 169 million USD. As rumors of the structural swaying and internal flooding began to leak into elite investment circles, the developers quietly cut the asking price to 920 million yen, 130 million USD. Ultimately, when the transaction finally closed, the penthouse traded for a heavily discounted 500 million, 70 million USD. Let the math on that sink in. That single transaction required the seller to absorb a staggering capital loss of hundreds of millions of yuan. A financial hit large enough to completely fund the entire structural maintenance and repair reserve of a standard multi-tower residential development. This isn't an isolated case of market softness. Floor after floor, unit after unit in this ultra-luxury tower has resold at a price far below its original sponsor pre-sale valuation. And this is happening during a decade when prime, Tier 1 waterfront luxury real estate across major Chinese metros broadly appreciated. This is not a macroeconomic trend. This is a severe, building-specific structural discount. Professional real estate appraisers and asset management firms now have a specific name, a corporate black mark, and a Supreme Court docket number to attach directly to this property. Visual, a stylized architectural flowchart showing the cyclical destruction of property value. Arrow 1, structural litigation. Arrow 2, underwriter flight. Arrow 3, exploding common charges. Arrow 4, secondary market collapse. Then there is the institutional credit and banking side of this disaster. The highly critical phase that almost no mainstream real estate media covers. The moment a luxury residential tower enters an active, multi-front civil litigation alleging systemic structural defects and deliberate corporate fraud. Commercial bank risk management committees take immediate notice before approving a premium mortgage or an asset-backed loan for a high-net-worth buyer. Underpinnings and bank underwriters review the property's financial health and active litigation disclosures. A tower fighting a multi-hundred million yuan legal battle over whether its load-bearing skeleton is structurally sound is precisely the type of extreme risk asset that bank credit committees are explicitly built to avoid. When institutional financing dries up inside a building, the entire buyer pool instantly shrinks. The property is suddenly restricted exclusively to all-cash buyers, and all-cash buyers are ruthless. They demand deep, punishing discounts. The loan-to-value mathematics get uglier with every single media headline. Existing owners who already hold massive luxury mortgages find themselves trapped, sitting inside depreciating vertical units that are now worth significantly less than the original state-stamped appraisal value on the day they closed their contracts. The commercial property insurance market runs in the exact same disastrous directi. An architectural facade with a legally documented history of nearly 2,000 structural defects and ongoing saltwater moisture infiltration is the ultimate high-exposure risk. It is a continuous insurance claims generator. Consequently, the building master insurance policy gets repriced by commercial underwriters accordingly. These astronomical premium increases flow directly into the monthly residential committee common charges. High common charges flow directly into ballooning monthly carrying costs. and escalating carrying costs flow straight back into suppressing the building's resale value. It is a vicious, inescapable economic loop, and every single turn of that loop is paid for entirely by the people who bought the apartments, not by the development consortium that sold them. This brings us to the crucial role of the Jinmao Bund Vista Residential Committee itself. There is a strict legal and fiduciary reason why this board of wealthy owners refuses to stop fighting. Under national property management regulations, a residential committee owes an absolute fiduciary duty to safeguard the common property and safety of its unit owners. The moment the committee's independent structural engineers handed them an official defect report containing the words, "Acute life, safety hazards," doing nothing stopped being an option. Legally, the committee is mandated to aggressively pursue the building's structural and financial remediation, which is exactly why this high-stakes battle has not faded quietly into the background the way corporate developers always hope these disputes will. Visual, final, cinematic slow-panning shot of the razor-thin white concrete tower pierces the heavy sea fog. The screen fades to black as the dramatic background music resolves into a single, lingering ambient note. The residents of Jinmao Bund Vista possess something that 99% of wronged property buyers around the world never get. Effectively unlimited legal war chests, access to the absolute top construction law firms in the country, and a pristine paper trail that their engineering experts have spent years meticulously assembling. If the wealthiest, most well-connected property buyers cannot secure structural accountability with these immense resources, what chance does an ordinary condo buyer have? So, where does this leave this monumental file? The corporate defendants continue to deny any intentional wrongdoing. Chairman Zhang Feng's legal team maintains that the structure is a resilient, premium engineering marvel, and the municipal courts will ultimately decide who is right, likely years from now. But step back from the complex legal machinery and look at what is already established, verified, and completely beyond dispute. The thinnest residential super-tall tower of its generation, 20 billion yuan in upfront sales. A certified facade survey counting 1,893 distinct defects. 2 massive civil lawsuits totaling over 2.9 billion yen in combined legal demands. A trophy penthouse that shed roughly 700 million yen of its original valuation on its way to a forced sale. And one quiet, calculated 3-character alteration in a legal disclosure document will prevent, to design to prevent, that a Supreme Court is now being asked to interpret as a corporate confession of guilt. The megastructures in these files always tell the truth eventually. Concrete cannot lie. Physics is absolute. Water always finds the crack. And paper, it turns out, keeps a permanent record of exactly when the promises changed. The only lingering question the Jinmao Bund Vista Tower leaves us with is the one a judicial panel may someday answer. Not whether the tower failed its owners, but whether it was always destined to, and whether someone knew from the very first pour. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were reviewing the engineering paper trail, does that one altered phrase prove intentional corporate fraud, or is it just routine legal drafting? I read every single perspective, and the sharpest analytical take gets pinned to the top. This has been the Construction Files, document number 9. The file stays open,